On today's show, yesterday it was the worst kept secret, and now it's official. Travis Green's coaching staff has been announced, and our NHL Draft Rankings continue. 2 out of our 3 players today are born and raised in Ottawa. That's all coming up on today's Locked On Sens.
I'm Jake Sanderson.
I'm Tim Stützle, and you're listening to the Locked On Senators podcast.
You're Locked On Senators, your daily podcast on the Ottawa Senators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome! You are locked on to the Ottawa Senators, the only daily podcast covering the Sens. I'm Ross Levitan on the outskirts of enemy territory while Brandon Pillar is on vacation, but Pillsy will drop by later when we cover some more draft targets in the first, late first, and early second round range. Speaking of the draft, it feels like everyone in the public scouting community is releasing their final lists. The Elite Prospects Draft Guide was out yesterday. That's always a marathon read. Lots of great information we'll incorporate into our rankings going forward. We also got the final boards from Scott Wheeler, Chris Peters, and more. But first, the Senators coaching staff. Daniel Alfredsson is back. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. You can also follow the show on social media. We're at Sens Central on Twitter and LockedOn.Senators on Instagram. Today is Tuesday, June 4th, and now that Travis Green has got his coaching staff announced, the pressure turns to Steve Staios to find the players to play under this staff. Those are conversations for the weeks ahead before the draft, 24 days away from the Sphere, round 1 in Vegas. Pillsy and I, boots on the ground, content at Sens Central and Locked On Senators YouTube page. They're going to have their table set. Nolan, Baumgartner, and Mike Yeo have been hired officially as assistant coaches on a staff that some are surprised is running 4 assistants deep. Ben Sexton will also be back. So the way it trickles down, we think Mike Yeo will have kind of more of an overarching role. Nothing has been defined, however. I'll get to what Steve Staios had to say in the press release that came out just minutes before I hit record this morning. Officially, it's Mike Yeo, Daniel Alfredsson, Ben Sexton, and Nolan Baumgartner. Now, Nolan Baumgartner, I talked about the rumors yesterday. He's been in the Travis Green coaching sphere for a long time. So it's good to have some continuity there and a guy who you've been able to lean on before. The two go all the way back from 2013 to 2017 with the Utica Comets. And then Baumgartner was also on Travis Green's staff his entire time in the Vancouver Canucks time in 2017 through early into the 2021 season. So the expectation is Nolan Baumgartner will run the defense, run the PK. Daniel Alfredsson is back. We assume with power play duties. Hopefully he gets those one-timers back because I can't watch Josh Norris be on his strong side any more shifts. From Steve Staios talking about, or this is actually from Travis Green talking about Daniel Alfredsson. We remember in Travis Green's intro press conference, he said he texted with him briefly, but they wanted to sit down, talk strategy, see if there was a fit for Alfie to come back behind the bench after he spent the final 56 games there with Jacques Martin. Travis Green, quote, Daniel's wealth of hockey knowledge, his mindset as it relates to a standard that we want to incorporate, and his understanding of what it takes to win will make him an invaluable complement to both our staff and to our team. So that's the thought from Travis Green on Daniel Alfredsson. We're still waiting to find out who's going to be the eye in the sky. It would be a pretty crowded bench if they're going to have all those guys there. They also announced that goaltending coach Justin Peters will be back, as will video coach Mike King. Now, we know the other video coach was let go in the middle of last season. No reason was given for why. He was just taken off the website, so we'll leave it at that. But Mike King will be back, and I like the way this is forming up. You want to get my opinion on it, it's just a matter of getting the right sounding boards. And here, I think there's a nice mix of experience. Mike Yeo's been a head coach before, spent, I believe, 4 or 5 seasons with the Minnesota Wild in the early 2000s, and then was with the St. Louis Blues for a part of 3 seasons as well. Sure, it didn't go that great as a head coach, but for what I'm told, he's a very good tactician and should be an elite, if not very good, assistant coach. Sometimes head coaches, people don't understand. It's less about X's and O's, more about the morale, keeping everybody accountable, the overarching director of operations versus kind of the nitty gritty, which is where we believe, and people we've spoke to believe, Mike Yeo will be an asset to this coaching staff for the Ottawa Senators. So now that the coaching staff is completed, I need the Sens to get to work on the roster, whether that's just signing Shane Pinto, making a splash. We've heard some insiders say, hey, don't be surprised if there's a trade or two this week, because the Stanley Cup final starts on Saturday and then doesn't end until, I believe, if it goes 7 games, until right before the draft. 4 days, if I'm not mistaken, right before everybody's going to be in Vegas, the award show the day before. So it's going to be a really hectic time for everybody getting to Vegas and figuring out everyone's plan. So Marty Necas is the number 1 trade target right now, not for the Senators. I don't think there's a enormous fit. It would be nice, but I think there's probably other teams that would be willing to offer more. You've heard the names Chicago, Montreal as options for Marty Necas. How funny would it be if he ends up in Columbus right after their general manager, Don Waddell, take that job with the Blue Jackets? I digress. Getting back to the Senators and what's next for them. Let us know in the comments what you think needs to be done next from a team building standpoint, because it makes sense. You have to have the GM in place, then the head coach in place, then his coaching staff, and now the trickle down goes to the players. And simply, it wasn't good enough last year. You can point the finger to the goalies all you want. League worst. I get it. Is that something that needs to be addressed? We know that the Senators have sniffed around with Linus Ullmark, potentially Jacob Markstrom. And it's worth noting with Markstrom that there is a very long relationship with Nolan Baumgartner and Travis Green from their time in Utica together. I believe Markstrom led Utica to a Calder Cup final. You can fact check me on that, but I know they do have a long relationship. Markstrom was his guy in Vancouver. So that's something, just, hey, keep your eye on it. Senators draft 7th, Flames draft 9th as it stands right now. I'm curious to see if there's any trade to be had between Ottawa and Calgary. Could Calgary get Igor Sokolov in a trade? Sounds like they were sniffing around him at the deadline, but the Senators felt it was too valuable for Belleville to go on a playoff run, so they wanted to keep Igor in Belleville. But as we've seen with some other long-term Belleville Senators like Lassie Thompson, sometimes those guys need to find another organization to take the next step in their career. As much as I would love Igor to succeed in Ottawa, don't think he's really been given a shot this past season. No call-ups, and the Senators used quite a bit of players. And if Calgary is a fit, I wonder if it's part of a larger trade. But calm before the storm right now as we are approaching, not even approaching. We still got 4 full days before the NHL resumes with the Stanley Cup final. But great news today if you're an Ottawa Senators fan, because this was the natural next step for the Senators. In the press release, Steve Staios says, we're pleased to welcome Nolan and Mike to the organization. In addition to the returnees, we're confident that this coaching staff represents a strong blend of experience and one that will provide Travis with a high-level support while they collectively lead our team going forward. One other thing about this I like is that you've got the returnees. Alfie obviously kind of did the internal audit of the organization over the last 56 games last year, but you have a nice blend here of guys returning like Ben Sexton and Justin Peters, promoted from the AHL team. So that shows that internally you're looking at giving guys more responsibility and growing from within. You're seeing the same on the management side with Ryan Bonus right now, kind of being groomed. You would expect to be the next GM and have Steve Staios keep his president of hockey operations title. That's obviously a ways down the line, but that does indicate, I think, a healthy organization, a one where people internally believe that promotions are to be had, but then bringing in Baumgartner as a sounding board, a guy who knows what green standards are, what he wants, and then a guy like Mike Yeo coming over from Vancouver, where the team just had success. Ultimately, and Pilsy and I have discussed plenty of times, this could be a situation where Ottawa is Vancouver, where you underperform heavily, go into the offseason. Of course, you get better goaltending, but among other things, better coaching. And look what happened with Vancouver, making it out of the first round this season. So I'm happy with the coaching staff. I'm waiting and seeing. I'm not judging Steve Staios until I see some player movement, but people are starting to get curious because it has been a long time. He's been on the job almost 11 months. No, probably a little less. 8, 9 months. And guess what? He's acquired one player from outside the organization, Boris Tkachuk. Okay, I'm not counting Jamison Reese, Bon Giovanni, nice pickups for Belleville. Boris Tkachuk on waivers, the only external addition to the Ottawa Senators. That's got to change. Let us know how many pieces you think need to be added to this team, but I'm very intrigued, and we'll have you every step of the way here, Locked On Senators. Quick note on the NHL draft and our rankings. We're going to get to them. As we discussed, Pilsy is on vacation. He's at the old Zion National Park. He posted some great photos, by the way. Check him out on Twitter, Brandon Pillar1. That place looks magical. So he's going to be joining us. We pre-recorded the player profiles for today and for tomorrow. Pilsy will be back with me Thursday and Friday on our prospect profile rankings. My goodness. So we talked off the top just how Elite Prospects Draft Guide came out. That changes things very drastically. A couple of interesting notes for Elite Prospects Draft Profile or Draft Rankings. They've got Artem Levshunov at number 4. They've actually snuck Caden Lidstrom up at 3. So it's nice to see a little difference in trend, not just having the 1, 2, 3 set like some others do, where Levshunov and Demidov are both right in the top 3. Also of note, Sam Dickinson is lower on Elite Prospects. He's down at number 10. Zeev Buium is up at 7. And because of the way it all worked out, no spoilers, but Zeev Buium has jumped up to number 4 on our rankings. And we need Bob's final rankings. We'll get those, but my goodness, 4th. I'm warming up to the idea of Zeev Buium as the pick. Look, they could go 12 different directions, and I would be happy with the pick. Tija Ginla was number 6 on Elite Prospects. That's thinking he's Montreal territory. So let's watch out with the praise for Tija Ginla, because Habs fans could and will use it against us in the years going forward. All right. Any other draft questions? Leave it below. I'll get to those answers tomorrow. For now, we'll hand it over to our draft rankings here. You're listening to Locked On Senators, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Locked On, the FanDuel Sportsbook. And it's winner-take-all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. We talked about it yesterday. The Oilers are underdogs. I am betting on the Oilers to win the Stanley Cup responsibly, and I'm also going to parlay it with Connor McDavid. I need every Connor McDavid prop. I probably do those by games over at FanDuel. Each game, I like doing Connor McDavid to score and the Oilers to win. Would it hit in Game 6? Absolutely. Against their last series against Dallas, the Oilers is my pick for the Stanley Cup final. So that's $150 to bet on with bonus bets if you hit on a $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. It's FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. All right, a reminder, you can follow the show on social media. We're at Sens Central on Twitter and LockedOn.Senators on Instagram. We're into the first round. Can you believe it? In our draft rankings, very exciting prospects ahead. And you can also go check out any of the profiles you missed on YouTube. All right, coming in at number 32 on the Locked On Senators 2024 NHL Draft Rankings, it's Andrew Basha. This guy's highlight reel, Pilsy, is electric.
Yeah, Ross, this is probably the most exciting prospect we've looked at here. And Basha is all offense. Like, he's able to put up points at a monstrous rate in 63 games last season with the Medicine Hat Tigers in the WHL. He had 30 goals, 55 assists, good for 85 points. So 85 points, 63 games, not bad. 5 points in 5 playoff games. You'll love to see point per game in the postseason. And look, obviously, a lot of this helps when you're playing on a line with Caden Lindstrom. But keep in mind, Ross, Caden Lindstrom got injured for a good chunk of that season. So it's not like the production just fell off a cliff when Lindstrom left the lineup.
It's so funny to see the rankings on this 5'11", 174-pound left winger, November birthday. So one of the older players in this draft. Elite Prospects has him at 16 on their list. Well, Corey Prodman has him at 87. But if you go Olympic
87
style,
is, we got to talk about that later. I'll let you continue, Ross. But 87 is just wild to have a guy like Basha that low.
well, funny enough, one is so high and the other so low that the average out, it basically, he ends at 32 here. And if you go with our other 5 entities, you're probably looking at 32 as well, because he's 24 for Bob, 30 for Button, 28 for Wheeler, 38 for Peters, and 26 for McKean's. So it is a pretty tight range for him until you add in those 2 outliers at one end and the other. Now, when you look at Andrew Basha, you look at the excitement when he has the puck and how he picks up speed through the neutral zone. He's a one-man wrecking crew. It's really fun to watch. Like, you talk about the way and the acceleration is, I guess quickness would be the one word. When you're describing his game, everything he does at 110% speed.
Yeah, Ross, I just did the quick math there. So if we do Olympic style, which you like to do once in a while, take out the highest, take out the lowest, his average turns out to be 29.2.
Okay, so a little bit higher.
So, like, I don't know. I would love to get Pronman's, obviously we can find his write-up and stuff, but I would love to get him to explain how he has Basha that low, because a lot of other scouts are very high on this guy. There's so many skills that I like Wheeler applauds his competitiveness and how he forechecks hard. He isn't afraid to get bumped along the way. David St. Louis from EP mentions how he's at his best when he has the puck. And what he does from the highlights I was watching, Ross, a couple things I really noticed is he gets these short speed bursts, and then he combines the speed with tricking his opponents. So there's no real way for them to stop him, because if they try to get in his way, he can get around them with his quick speed. Or if they're trying just to slow him down, he's able to use that stick handling and figure out another way to get around him. So I think Basha is just a guy that he's going to help your team create so much offense just because he's so effective at moving the puck up the ice and into the ozone.
Our friend over at Flow Hockey, Chris Peters, just talks about how, yeah, he's electric in the offensive zone. He's a highly skilled creative playmaker, is what Peters says. But he also says there's some really bad habits and questions about the overall compete level. We know he's not the biggest guy, but also this guy might have the Johnny Gaudreau amount of hits this past year. He doesn't engage physically at all. Is that something you think scouts are going to take into account when they're looking of whether or not this is the guy for their organization?
Well, it depends how you're going to define physicality, right? Because like I read Wheeler's quote, or I don't know if it's a quote, but paraphrasing from Wheeler's write-up, saying he forechecks hard and isn't afraid to get bumped along the way. So does that mean Bash is out there laying Mark Method hip checks in center ice? No. But does it mean that if the puck's in the corner, he's going to stand back and wait for everyone else to do the battling? I don't think so either. So I think you can be a physical player without throwing big hits or being dominant physically. It's more just that he's not going to shy away from those puck battles or doing what it takes to get into that prime area of ice that a goal scorer like Basha needs to get into to be successful. And I don't think that's the biggest knock on him, Ross. I think the biggest knock on Basha is he doesn't love to play defense. We've been talking about how much he loves offense, how much he can break the puck into the offensive zone, how many points this kid puts up. That's all well and good in the WHL and junior. But if he's going to be successful moving on, he's going to have to figure out a way to at least put some effort in defensively. Like, it really seems like he's not that interested defensively. Every single scout that I've looked at, the only kind of compliments and positives to his game relate to the offensive side of the puck. So clearly there's not a lot to be desired, or he's leaving a lot to be desired when it comes to the defensive side of the puck. Now, look, nobody's looking at Connor McDavid and is saying, that guy is horrible, he doesn't play defense. Because if he's putting up all these points, you can give him a bit of a loose chain when it comes to playing hard defensively. So if Basha's going to go that route and he's going to kind of outscore some of his defensive woes, that's one way you can go. But I think for teams to really consider him in the first round and kind of take a swing at him, especially if he goes late in the first round, Ross, and these are Stanley Cup contenders who don't have their first round picks a lot or have depleted prospect pools from making trades for rentals and going on deep runs, they're not going to want to take a swing on a guy that isn't interested in playing defense.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. Now, what do you think? You kind of answered it there, though, but do you have a team that you're kind of eyeing that would be a fit for him?
Honestly, Ross, I think a lot of teams would make sense. I think the best spot for him, though, would be to go to a middling team, not a contender, not a rebuilding team, a middling team that's looking for a big offensive upside. So maybe an Ottawa Senators team at 25. I wouldn't be that upset if they went for him at 25, Ross. There's just so many things that I love about this player. He's so fun to watch. One of the other things I noticed in his highlights, when he takes a shot, he's not just like, okay, I ripped it on net, didn't go in, one of my teammates will clean it up. He's like that point guard in basketball that takes a shot from 3-point range, and as soon as it's left his hand, he's running towards the rim to get the rebound. That's what Basha does. When he shoots it, he's crashing the net to look for that rebound or to create offense or create chaos. So I honestly think, Ross, that he can be an elite top line player one day. It may take time, but just the offensive skills, you combine the shot. He's one of those guys that can go down the wing and just rip one bar down on a goalie. You know, I love that, Ross. Nice, easy goal. So I've got Basha at 4 out of 5 stars, Ross.
Whoa, 4.
Yeah, I got him as a 4-star guy. The offensive talent is just so incredible. It's hard to leave a guy like that on the table because you're going to be wondering, how's he going to, maybe he doesn't immediately give dividends, but I think once he gets used to the pro game a little more and learns how to defend, because he's going to learn how to defend, I think he's going to be a really good player. I would have no problem picking him at 25.
Wouldn't it be fun, though, for the Calgary Flames to get him, the hometown kid? He could help out their prospect pool. I like them. They have 2 second-round picks. They've got 2 first-round picks, including Vancouver's, which is going to be later on in that first round. I'm also going to note the Carolina Hurricanes. They love their analytics there, and his are unbelievable, especially on the offensive side. Andrew Basha comes in at number 32. On the Locked On Senators Draft Rankings. For more draft profiles, go check us out at Sens Central. More draft profiles on the other side. You're listening to LOSP, your team, every day. All right, Pilsy, it is time to continue our list of Locked On Senators Draft Rankings. Coming in at number 31 on the Draft Rankings is Henry Mews from the Ottawa 67s. A good Ottawa lad. We love that. 6 foot tall, 180-pound right shot defenseman, a March birthday, and a guy whose consistency is the calling card of his game.
Ross, I think you just hit about 4 separate check boxes for Sens fans for what they're looking for in a draft player. A right-hand shot defenseman, yup. Ottawa boy, yup. over or at least 6 feet. Yup. Puts up points. Yup. Like, this guy is a very interesting prospect for the Ottawa Senators, especially when, like you mentioned, born in Ottawa, played junior in Ottawa. Why not keep that train going and play pro in Ottawa? In 65 games with the 67s this season, he had 15 goals, 46 assists, good for 61 points. Now, the points did drop off a bit in the playoffs, but that'll happen sometimes. In 10 playoff games, still had 5 points. So that's, for a defenseman, that's still solid. He was a point per game guy in the U18s with Team Canada with 7 points in
including
7 games.
3 assists in the final against the States.
Yeah, so look, maybe it dropped off in the playoffs with the 67s, but he was able to ramp it up in a clutch, meaningful game with Team Canada. So you love to see that. And this is a guy that the rankings aren't that, it's not that crazy, the range of them. Like, there's a couple people that are lower, a couple people that are higher, but for the most part, it's a general consensus about what this player is.
Scott Wheeler has him at 25 on his rankings. Chris Peters at 31. Bob McKenzie at 37. Should mention McKean's at 27. Corey Prodman has him at 42. And Elite Prospects down at 45. That's an average of 34.5. He was the 7th overall pick in the OHL draft a couple of years ago. He's been a huge part of the 67 success, but according to Wheeler, scouts have some very wide opinions of him, probably further than the range that we have right now for our 7 entities, because in his rookie year with the OHL, he was unbelievable and just kind of really an important player on what was a great 67s team. He plays well internationally, but this year, you mentioned the points fell off in the playoffs. There's also some parts of the season where he maybe wasn't at his best. Looked sloppy, unsure of himself at times even, according to Scott Wheeler, and that has had scouts turn their back on a player who was once thought of to be a lottery pick, and now it's almost like, okay, will he be a first rounder is now the conversation around Mews.
Yeah, Mews is an offenseman. Don't get it twisted. This guy knows how to play with the puck. He knows how to put the puck in the back of the net. He knows how to set up Luca Pinelli. Ross, I don't know if you experienced the same thing, but watching 67 highlights, I'm blanking on the 67's play-by-play announcer, but he could have just done a recording of, and Henry Mews passes it up to Luca Pinelli, and Pinelli scores. And then he could have just went and got a coffee and played that on loop, because that was all of the highlights of Henry Mews, it seemed like, were assists to Luca Pinelli. And he had a lot of assists this year, 46 of them. And he led in power play assists with 19. He was 3rd on the 67 in points. He's patient with the puck. He draws opponents in, and then once opponents are drawn into him, he finds those guys with the open ice, usually Pinelli, and then they're able to make a big play there. Now, those are some of the pauses of him. You did mention some of the negatives, and you can kind of tell that he's a guy that cheats on offense a little bit. He gets out of position a little bit defensively, and sometimes he's a little too excited to make that pinch at the blue line, and he gets burned on it. But it's one of those things where, I'm not comparing him to Erik Karlsson, but the similar qualms about Karlsson, where it's like, man, he's making that pinch. He's leaving Mark Method out to dry, and he's always focused on offense. But Erik Karlsson would get you 2-3 points a night, and maybe it would cost you 1 or 2 goals, but you know he's going to come up with those points. And I feel like that's kind of where Mews is at right now. Now, you don't necessarily want that. You want a defenseman that can play defense. I know, crazy theory. But I think when you're so successful offensively, you got to cut him a bit of slack when it comes to the defense. Or you got to find him, just like Erik Karlsson with Mark Method, you have to find him the right complementary D partner, Ross. We always talk about the yin and yang. Get Henry Mews with the left-hand shot shutdown defenseman.
But how long until you could see Henry Mews in the league? Because to me, there's some refinement in the consistency within the game for him about making his reads and having everything kind of flow a little bit better when you're thinking about what it projects to be in the pro game.
No, that's definitely fair. I don't think this is a guy that's going to get drafted and come into the NHL right away for sure. Definitely, I do not think that. I wouldn't be surprised, Ross, if he plays another year in junior. He's got 2 years under his belt here with the 67. So get him another year in Ottawa in junior. And then maybe he goes to the AHL for a season or two, and then he's in the NHL. So I guess to answer your question, at least 3 more years of development before you see him even start to get in NHL games. Because I think there is a lot of work that development coaches and other coaches are going to have to do along the way to get his defensive game up to where it needs to be to play at the professional level.
The good news, though, is when you want to teach someone defense, the number one thing they have to have is skating, right? You have to be able to get to the positions defensively to even think about making a play, and skating is the number one attribute for Henry Mews. McKean's just lauding the fact that he's never out of a play when he's back checking, and he's able to jump up into the rush and help out with that great speed and great skating ability. So I like Henry Mews as a player. I don't think I like him at 25. I think I like him more in the 39 range. Will he get that deep? Probably not, even though at Bob, he's 37 on Bob's list. So maybe he does fall to 39. What do you have for Sens stars on Henry Mews?
I've got 4 out of 5 stars here, Ross. Like I mentioned off the top of this profile, he checks a lot of the boxes for what Sens fans are looking for and would get excited about. However, I have to do this every time because it's a big part of it. If the Sens were to select Zane Parekh with 7th overall, you do not draft Henry Mews later, in my opinion. Now, if the Sens do not draft Zane Parekh or a right shot defenseman with 7th overall, then you start taking a look at a guy like Henry Mews. I don't think he's going to be there at 39, Ross. So I think either if he's still on the table and they haven't selected a right-hand shot defenseman, they got to decide whether to nab him with 25 or let him free and say, hey, enjoy your time in Ottawa in juniors, but you're not going to be back here for the pros, or at least not right away. So I like Henry Mews, 4 to 5 stars.
A good old Nepean Raider alumni, Henry Mews, comes in at number 31 on our NHL Draft Rankings. All right, coming in at number 30 on the 2024 NHL Draft Rankings, we have Dean Letourneau, who just made an absolute mockery of the U18 AAA loop with St. Andrews College. So he went to prep school this past year. Now he's taking his talents to Sioux Falls in the USHL before heading to Boston College in the fall of 2025. So I can already tell you that Dean Letourneau, a good Ottawa lad, is going to be a long-term project for a team.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of interesting things to look at when we're talking about Dean Letourneau. First thing you got to mention is the size. I mean, my God, Ross, I don't know what you have his official size at.
6'6", 210.
Yeah, 6'6", 210. He's an absolute unit out there on the ice.
He's a centerman, a 6'6" centerman.
Yep, shades of another prospect, shades of 2 prospects that will get the duality of where Letourneau could end up here.
Another Pilsy player comparable coming up.
Yeah, famous Pilsy player comparable.
Oh, here we go.
For people to dunk on me in a year later. That's fine. I don't care.
Rip off these points. It's such a joke.
Yeah, that's where I was getting to, Ross, because the first thing you have to talk about is size first. That's his main thing for Letourneau. But then you got to look at the points here. Now, I'll be honest, Ross, I don't really have a full understanding of how the league and the competition level of where Letourneau was playing compares to other spots we look at, whether it's USHL, CHL, overseas in J20 leagues or what have you. I don't really know how to properly gauge this, but I'm going to go ahead and say this is one of the weaker competition leagues, as Dean Letourneau put up in 56 games, 61 goals, so a goal, more than a goal per game pace, 66 assists, also more than an assist per game pace for 127 points in 56 games. That is absolutely insane. Like at what point is he just sitting there being like, no offense, but you guys are kind of boring. This is kind of easy.
Kind of. 127.2. When you were discussing, when we were making this graphic, I was like, 61 goals in 56 games. That's ridiculous. And then he has even more assists.
Yeah, it's nuts, dude. Like, now he did play 2 USHL games. Funny enough, the competition is obviously a little better because he had no points. Now, 2 games, obviously very small sample size, so I'm not putting that on Dean there. But he did have an injury at the end of the season, so that affected him a little bit. But obviously, it didn't affect his point total too much there.
Not at all. And Dean Letourneau is another Ottawa lad, grew up playing for the Ottawa Valley Titans. But now we're looking ahead for Dean Letourneau, and it's tough to project. And that's kind of where NHL scouts are going to be too, because it's not every year where you see guys get drafted in the first, second round out of Canadian high schools. We see it occasionally in the U.S. when guys don't go to the USHL but have already committed. But the fact to me that he's got a scholarship to Boston College, that's a big time school. And that to me means he's on a great track to develop into a unique NHL centerman. When you think 6'6" centerman, sometimes I get a little nervous. The Joe Colburn effect, who was a first round pick and didn't really amount to much. You think of Logan Brown. I know injuries affected him there, but when you have these 6'6" centermen who aren't overly physical, right? Like he's more of a skill player than he is a physical shutdown bottom 6 type guy. There's less roles for him then, because that's just going to frustrate coaches when you have a guy out there with that size if they're not using it in their bottom 6. So he's going to have to contribute offensively or develop a bit more of a mean streak if he's going to be a top 6 contributor in the NHL. Corey Prodman, who loves size, loves him. Shocker, 28 on his list. 32 for Bob McKenzie, 33 for McKean's, 29 for elite prospects, and then Chris Peters at 42 and Scott Wheeler bringing out the rear at 43. But Pilsy, these are all like pretty close together in terms of the range from 28 to 43.
Yeah, I'm surprised by some of these ranges because this is not an EP type player. Typically, they like the smaller, shiftier, better skaters. And Ross, in Pronman's write-up, he mentioned how Letourneau is a low energy and low compete guy. So to have a low compete guy in your first round is very interesting, especially when we talked about Pronman had Andrew Basha, one of the most skilled offensive players of the entire draft, at 87. And then he's got Letourneau here at 28 is very interesting to me. Here's my concern, Ross. And just so people know, Ross is the one who compared Dean Letourneau to Logan Brown. I want that on the record. That was Ross's player comparable.
No.
Well, while we're on this, for me, Dean Letourneau is either going to be a Logan Brown or a Tage Thompson and nothing in between. So if you want to take that risk at your own peril or your own success, all the power to you. But Ross, here's what I'm worried about. So you've got a 6'6", 210-pound centerman that's absolutely lighting it up in a low competition level league, U18 AAA hockey.
He didn't even make the team for the U18s either. So does that kind of factor in with you? I know he had a nagging injury, didn't go back and finish with Sioux Falls, but I think that to me is kind of the question mark for scouts, right? If he can't even crack a team like that in his draft year, you start to wonder about the path. But again, he needs to just stay confident in what he's doing. It's going to be, I think, probably 6 years. Like, he's the kind of guy who might make the NHL at 23, 24, 25 years old, but then you need to have the respect that he's probably had a bit of a growth spurt here at one point or another, and he has to grow into his body and figure out the hand-eye again, all that. Obviously, it's working at the lower levels in Canadian high school, but The real test and the real kind of time where he'll come on people's radars is 2 years from now at Boston College. He'll be surrounded with great talent there. And I think that they've done a pretty good job at Boston College developing other big centermen. Who was it here? I'm just thinking about kind of what Dean Letourneau can be at the NHL level. I think that to me is like you get excited or carried away when you think of Tage Thompson, and then you get nervous and you're like, oh man, like if I draft a big centerman that isn't physical and he's coming out there and like fans see him for the first couple times and the puck isn't going into the net for him, then what happens? Then what does the conversation become around a player like that? But I like him. I think I'm a bit higher on him than you. If he goes 25, I think that's a little bit early for me. But at 39, this would be a pick I would be very happy about at 39th overall.
Well, Ross, here's my concern. So you've got a big centerman that's dominating in a lower competition league. Like Pronman said, low energy, low compete. Like you mentioned, he's not a guy that plays a physical game. So what happens here is you start developing bad habits. You start being like, well, I'm so big, guys are too scared to get the puck off me. I don't have to worry about people forechecking too or back checking too hard to try to get the pucks. I'm going to win all the loose puck battles just because everyone out there is so much smaller, so much undersized than me. And you start getting comfortable and expecting to be able to play your game a certain way because you've had so much success with that. And he hasn't needed to adapt, obviously, because he's playing low effort and putting up more than 2 points a game. So I think it's going to be a grueling process to try to get this player to work the right way. You mentioned he's going to play in the USHL for a season. I think that's going to be a big eye opener for him. Then he's going to college. I think he's going to spend at least 2 seasons there. Then you're going to have to work on him in the AHL. And then he could end up being Logan Brown, or it could end up being Tage Thompson. And Tage Thompson didn't pop off onto the scene till much later. Like, I think Sabres fans, at first, they were like, this is the main piece of the Ryan O'Reilly deal. And he wasn't really popping off. But now I think they're laughing because he's amazing, obviously. So I've got him at 2.5 stars, Ross. I'm certainly not taking him at 25, and I'm probably not even thinking about taking him at 39, just because this is a Sens prospect pipeline that is so bare. You can't afford to take a risk on a guy that at best pans out 5 years from now. So just not the guy for me. I'm sure with the right development and in the right spot, he can have success, but not the guy I'm targeting if I'm the Ottawa Senators.
Dean Letourneau comes in at number 30 on our Locked On Senators NHL Draft Rankings. Thanks for being a part of the show. Appreciate you liking, watching, listening, subscribing to the podcast wherever you get yours. We'll be back tomorrow with the latest on the Ottawa Senators and more draft profiles. That's Brandon Pillar. I'm Ross Levitan. This has been another edition of the Locked On Senators podcast. Your team every day.